The wind screamed across the frozen plains like 1,000 wild spirits let loose from the mountains. Snow came sideways, biting through coats, clawing at faces, covering every trail that once led home. Under that endless white sky, a young woman named Clara stumbled forward, her breath breaking into shards of frost. She had left the broken wagon miles behind, praying she could make it to a lantern she thought she saw flicker far off the ridge. Her bonnet was torn, her fingers stiff as wood, her feet sinking deeper with each desperate step. Somewhere behind her, the echo of wolves cried through the wind, and somewhere ahead, she thought she heard a horse. But the storm swallowed every sound before it reached her ears. The world was turning slower now, heavy and pale, and Clara felt herself sinking, not just in the snow but in her will. She thought of her mother, of the cabin they left last summer when the harvest failed, of how she had promised to send word once she found work in town. But now the letter would never come. The cold crept up her legs, numbing her to the bone, her eyelids fluttering with every gust. She whispered a prayer, half to God and half to anyone still listening in that white wilderness. Then her knees gave out and she fell, half buried already by the storm's merciless hands. Miles away, under the shelter of a rocky ridge, a cowboy named Eli Reeves tightened the reins of his mare. He'd been riding since dawn, checking the northern line of his cattle before the storm came in. Now everything around him was a blur of white, the air so thick he could barely see his own breath. Still, his instincts told him someone was out there. Eli wasn't a man of too many words, but he had the kind of heart that never turned away from trouble, not even when it came dressed as a blizzard. He bent low in the saddle, calling out once, his voice lost to the wind. Then he saw it, just a faint shadow against the snow, something that didn't move with the storm. He spurred the horse forward, snow flying from the hooves, until the shape took form, a woman, half buried, her face pale as the frost itself. Eli jumped down, his boots sinking deep. "Ma'am?" he shouted, brushing snow from her coat, feeling for life. Her pulse was faint, barely there, but enough to tell him she wasn't gone yet. He wrapped his arms around her, lifting her gently against his chest, feeling the icy weight of her frozen dress. The mare snorted, restless in the wind, but Eli steadied her. He wrapped Clara in his blanket, tucking it around her face, whispering softly, "You hang on now, miss. You ain't dying out here. Not tonight." The ride back to his cabin was slow and brutal. The wind pushed against him like a living wall, each step of the horse a fight through the snow. He could feel her heartbeat fading against his chest, so he started to talk low and steady, the way he did with hurt horses, telling her she'd be all right, that she was safe, that the storm would tire before he did. Somewhere along the way the snow eased, just enough for him to see the outline of his cabin through the blur, a small light flickering in the window like a promise. By the time he reached the door, his hands were shaking from the cold. He kicked it open, carrying her inside, the warmth of the fire spilling across the wooden floor. He laid her near the hearth, removing his coat and boots, rubbing her hands between his. The heat bit at her skin, but she didn't stir. He lit a lamp, mixed water with whiskey, and poured a drop between her lips. "Come on now, miss. You got reason to wake." Her lashes trembled. A faint breath escaped her mouth. Eli smiled, the lines on his face deepening. "That's it. You stay with me." He added more wood to the fire, pulled a quilt from the cot, and wrapped it around her shoulders. Outside, the storm howled against the windows, but inside, the world had turned quiet. Two souls breathing in time, bound by the strange grace that only the wild can give. As the night deepened, Eli sat by the fire, watching her chest rise and fall, wondering who she was and how she'd come to be out there alone. A gold locket hung from her neck, its chain cold against her skin. He opened it gently and saw a faded photograph, a young girl with her mother. He closed it and whispered, "You'll tell me when you wake." The mare neighed outside, restless again, and Eli went to calm her, pulling his coat tight. The blizzard was dying, its anger running out, but its silence felt heavier than its roar. When he came back inside, Clara's eyes were half open, blue like frozen river water. Where am I?" she whispered. "You're safe," Eli said softly. "Name's Eli Reeves. Found you out past Ridge Hollow. Storm near took you. Her lips trembled, but tears welled up before words did. I thought I was going to die. Eli poured her a cup of warm broth, steadying her hands. Not while I was out riding, he said. Storm can take a lot, miss, but it don't take folks when I got breath left in me. Clara's voice was small, like something borrowed from another world. I was heading to Pine Creek. I never thought it'd come down so fast. Eli nodded. Storms out here don't give warnings. They just take what they please. For a while, they sat in the firelight, saying nothing, just the sound of the logs cracking and the wind's sigh beyond the door. Her fingers slowly regained color, her eyes flickering between the flames and his worn face. You could have left me, she said quietly. Many would have. Eli looked up from the fire. Maybe, but I ain't many. Outside, dawn began to creep across the horizon, painting the snow in soft blues and golds. The storm had passed, leaving a world remade, silent, pure, and strange. Eli opened the shutters, letting the light fall across her face. She smiled weakly, and for a moment he forgot the loneliness that usually filled these walls. He didn't know what her story was yet, but he knew the kind of pain that drove someone into a storm alone. And maybe, just maybe, this meeting wasn't chance. Morning came slow, spreading gold through the cracks of the log walls, the kind of quiet light that only follows a deadly storm. Eli sat in his chair by the fire, half asleep, his hat tipped low, while the sound of melting snow dripped from the roof. The world outside was a frozen sea of white, glittering under the new sun. Clara stirred under the quilt, the color back in her cheeks, her eyes fluttering open to the sight of a stranger's cabin and the scent of coffee mixing with the wood smoke. For a moment she didn't remember the storm, only the warmth, the crackling fire, and the gentle rise and fall of the man's steady breathing beside her. Then it came back, the wind, the fall, the darkness, and she sat up too fast, clutching the quilt to her chest. Eli's eyes opened immediately, sharp but kind. You're safe, he said in that low voice of his. Storm's gone, miss. You're lucky to be breathing. She looked around, her eyes landing on her torn boots by the door, her locket glinting beside the fire. You saved me, she whispered. Eli stood, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. Just did what any man should. I reckon. He poured her a tin cup of coffee, adding a little sugar before handing it to her. She took it with both hands, the warmth seeping through her fingers. I didn't think I'd see another sunrise, she said softly. Eli looked out the window where the snow shimmered like glass. Storms out here got a mind of their own. They'll test you, make you forget you're still human. But you hang on long enough, and sometimes they give you something back. She sipped quietly, watching him move around the small cabin. Tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man the land itself might have carved out of stone and wind. Everything about him spoke of solitude. The worn saddle leaning by the door, the rifle propped near the window, the silence that filled the spaces between his words. Do you live here alone? She asked. He nodded once. Ain't much choice. Town's 2 days' ride south. Fan't I got cattle that don't wait for company. Clara smiled faintly. It must get lonely. Eli chuckled dryly. Lonely's quieter than dead. There was no harshness in his tone, just the honesty of a man who'd learned to keep company with his own thoughts. She wanted to ask more, but her voice faltered. The cold still clung to her bones, and exhaustion pulled at her eyelids. Rest, Eli said, seeing it before she could speak. Ain't no rush. Roads'll stay buried a while, she nodded, letting her head sink back onto the pillow. The warmth of the fire, the steady rhythm of the dripping snow, and the sound of his boots pacing slow across the wooden floor pulled her into a deep sleep. Hours passed. When she woke again, the light had shifted softer now, and the air smelled of stew and smoke. Eli was at the stove stirring a pot. You hungry? He asked without turning. Starving, she admitted, surprised by how her voice carried now. He smiled at that. Good sign. Means you're back among the living. He served her a bowl and sat across from her, the fire flickering between them. As she ate, she told him her story, how her brother had gone missing in the mines near Pine Creek, how she'd left everything behind to find him, how her wagon broke down just as the storm rolled in. Eli listened quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. When she finished, he said, "That's a dangerous thing you done. Riding alone through a storm like that." She lowered her gaze. "I had no one left to come with me." Eli leaned back, the chair creaking. "You do now." The words hung there, simple and heavy. She didn't know what to say. Outside, the wind had died completely. The world was still, as if even nature was listening. "I can't stay," she said after a long pause. "I need to find him." Eli's jaw tightened. "You will, but not today. You step outside now, Storm will take what's left of you." She wanted to argue, but one look at him told her it wasn't worth it. He wasn't being cruel, he was being certain. The way men get when they've buried too many things. The snow never gave back. "One day," he said softly, "when the sun's higher, I'll help you ride out. But for now, you stay by that fire. You're still half ghost." Clara smiled faintly at his choice of words. "Half ghost," she repeated. "Feels about right." That night she couldn't sleep. The wind outside had calmed, but something about the silence kept her awake. She sat up, pulling the blanket tighter, and saw Eli sitting by the window, hat low, staring out into the dark. "Do you always keep watch?" she asked. "Old habits," he said. "Storm's got a way of coming back when you ain't looking." She stood, her bare feet brushing the wooden floor. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving me." He didn't look at her, but she saw the smallest smile at the corner of his mouth. "Ain't saving, miss. Just right thing to do." The firelight caught his eyes then, and for a moment she saw something there, a shadow of sorrow, like a man who'd lost before and never learned to stop waiting for what the world took. She wanted to ask, but she didn't. Instead, she sat beside him, both of them silent, watching the snow fall gentle and slow now, peaceful in the moonlight. As dawn neared again, a sound broke the quiet, a distant howl, faint but sharp. Eli stood, hand on his rifle, eyes narrowing. "Wolves," he muttered. He stepped outside, the cold rushing in, and Clara followed to the doorway, watching as he scanned the tree line. The sky was pale blue, streaked with morning light, the blizzard's aftermath stretching endless across the valley. Eli looked back and saw her shivering. "Get inside," he said softly. "Ain't no wolves coming close while I'm breathing." She didn't move right away. Something about his voice, the certainty, the calm, made her believe him more than she'd believed anything in a long time. When he came back, in snow clinging to his coat, she asked quietly, "Why did you really come out in that storm?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I don't rightly know," he said. "Guess I heard something in the wind. Maybe I just got tired of letting folks die alone." Clara felt a tear slip down her cheek before she could stop it. Eli turned back to the fire, pretending not to see. But in his heart, something had shifted too. In saving her, he had found a reason to breathe a little deeper again. As the first light of morning filled the cabin, Clara reached for her locket, opening it to the faded photo. "That's my brother," she said. "Tom, he's all I've got left," Eli nodded. "Then we'll find him. But when we ride together." She smiled through the tears, and for the first time since the storm, she felt safe, not just from the cold, but from the emptiness that had chased her for years. Outside, the snow began to glitter as the sun climbed higher, turning the land into a field of diamonds. Inside, two strangers, no longer lost, no longer alone, sat by the fire, the warmth of hope rising between them. Eli poured another cup of coffee and handed it to her, his rough hand brushing hers. "Drink up, miss," he said softly. "Long road ahead, but we'll get there." And as the camera of the heart pulled back on that quiet cabin in the wilderness, smoke curling up into the clear sky, the scars of the storm fading away, it was clear that sometimes the wild doesn't just take, sometimes it gives back. 3 days passed since the blizzard had gone silent, and the valley had turned into a world carved from glass and light. Every tree shimmered, every field held the memory of the storm, and every breath of wind carried the echo of what had nearly been lost. Inside the small log cabin, life had found its rhythm again. Clara was stronger now. The color had returned to her cheeks, though her hands still trembled when she held her cup. Eli had gone back to tending the horses, mending fences and keeping the fire steady. They spoke little, but when they did, it was enough. Sometimes silence speaks more than words ever could. One morning, Clara stepped outside, wrapped in Eli's old coat, the sky wide and blue above her. For the first time since the storm, she felt the sun touch her skin. It was sharp but kind. She watched Eli down by the corral, fixing a broken rail, his breath steaming in the cold. There was something about the way he moved, steady, unhurried, like the land itself trusted him. When he noticed her watching, he tipped his hat and she smiled. "You should rest," he called. "I ain't healed all the way yet." She shook her head. "Resting's for people who got nowhere to go." Eli leaned on the post, studying her with that quiet look of his. "You still think about finding your brother?" "Every hour," she said. "He's out there, Eli, I can feel it." Eli sighed, glancing toward the mountains that rose like teeth against the sky. "Those mines ain't kind." "To men, Clara. They take more than gold." "You sure he's still alive?" She looked down, her voice trembling. "I have to believe he is. Because if he's gone, then I don't know who I'm doing this for anymore." Eli's jaw tightened. He understood that feeling too well. The ache of trying to hold on to something that the world kept taking away. "All right," he said finally. "We ride out at dawn." Clara looked up sharply. "You mean it?" "I said I'd help, didn't I?" He replied. "Storm's over. Road's rough, but we'll make it." That night, Clara packed what little she had, Eli's spare gloves, a bit of food, her locket, and stood by the fire, staring into the flames. Eli came in from the barn, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "No," she admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the storm. I see the snow covering me." Eli nodded slowly. "Storms don't leave easy. They stay in your bones a while." He poured her a drink, the warmth cutting through the cold that memory left behind. "When the morning comes," he said, "you ride close behind me. Don't wander, don't fall behind, and whatever you see, you keep your head steady. That country out there's got teeth." She met his eyes and nodded. "I trust you." Eli's gaze softened just a little. "Then we'll make it through." At dawn, they saddled up. The air was sharp, the kind that bit through gloves, but the light was pure. Snow crunched beneath the horses' hooves, and their breath hung like ghosts. Eli led the way, scanning the ridges, his rifle strapped behind his saddle. Clara followed close, her heart beating with fear and hope in equal measure. The land stretched endless, white and gold, framed by the dark spines of pine trees. Hours passed in silence, save for the creak of leather and the call of distant crows. Around noon they stopped by a frozen creek to rest. Eli handed her a piece of bread, and they sat on a fallen log, the world quiet except for the whisper of wind through the branches. "You ever lose someone?" Clara asked suddenly. Eli stared at the horizon, his eyes distant. "Lost more than I care to count," he said finally. "This land don't let you keep much. Folks come and go, like the seasons. But you remember the ones worth remembering." "Who was she?" Clara asked softly. He turned to her, surprised. "How you know it was a she?" She smiled faintly. "The way you said it." He looked away, a small shadow crossing his face. "Her name was May. She was the kind that made the world quieter just by walking into it. We were going to build something here once. Cabin, herd, maybe a life. But the fever took her." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." Eli nodded once. "Ain't your sorrow to carry. But it's strange. When I found you in that snow, you were wearing her color. Blue. Same as the scarf she used to wear." They rode on after that, neither speaking. The mountains grew taller, their peaks cutting into the clouds. By late afternoon, they reached the first sign of the old mining town, abandoned carts, broken wheels, and the ghost of smoke long gone cold. The place felt hollow, like time itself had stopped to rest there. Clara's voice was a whisper. "He worked in the northern shaft. If he's alive, that's where he'll be." Eli dismounted, scanning the ridge. "Tracks here," he murmured, crouching low. "Fresh, too. Couple days old." "People?" Clara asked. "Maybe. Could be scavengers. Could be worse." He loaded his rifle, eyes sharp. "Stay close." As they moved through the ruins, the wind carried strange sounds, metal creaking, snow falling in sheets from the roofs, the faint echo of something that wasn't quite human. Clara's heart pounded. Then they saw it, a small campfire burning near the mouth of the mine. Eli raised his hand for silence, motioning her to stay behind. He stepped forward slowly, the crunch of snow loud in his ears. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man, ragged, his beard thick with frost, eyes wild with hunger and fear. When he saw Eli, he froze. "You from Pine Creek?" the man rasped. "Maybe," Eli said cautiously. "Who's asking?" The man looked at Clara, his eyes widening. "Clara?" he whispered, voice breaking. She froze, unable to breathe. "Tom?" Eli didn't sleep that night. He sat by the fireplace, one arm resting over the back of the chair, the other clutching a worn photograph, a memory from his own storm long ago. Outside, the wind still howled, but inside the cabin, it was the silence that hurt the most. He looked at Clara sleeping peacefully for the first time since she'd arrived. There was peace on her face now, as fragile, like a snowflake that could melt at a single touch. Eli's eyes softened. For years he had believed he'd never be able to save anyone again, but this time he had. Maybe fate had finally forgiven him. Morning came quietly. The storm had passed, leaving the world painted white and calm. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of a pan sizzling on the fire. Eli stood there cooking, his movements steady, careful. When she smiled faintly and said, "Good morning," it was the first time his heart had answered in warmth rather than ache. They sat across the table, two strangers brought together by something bigger than chance. After breakfast, Clara stood near the window, watching the vast frozen fields. "I have to find my brother," she whispered. "He might still be out there." Eli turned slowly, his jaw tightening. "It's suicide to go back now," he said. But then he saw the fear in her eyes, the kind of fear that hides love behind it. He sighed and reached for his coat. "All right," he said quietly. "But you're not going alone." The two saddled up Eli's old horse, Shadow. The air outside was still biting cold, but the storm had lost its anger. They rode across the snowfields, the sun breaking through in pale golden beams. Every hoofstep echoed like a heartbeat against the quiet plains. For hours they searched, calling her brother's name, until, finally, near the edge of a frozen creek, they saw movement, a half-buried figure in the snow. Eli jumped off the horse, running forward. It was Clara's brother, weak, frostbitten, but alive. Eli pulled him out, carried him to Shadow, and wrapped him in his own coat. Clara's tears froze on her cheeks as she whispered, "You saved him, like you saved me." Eli just shook his head, his voice low. "No, ma'am. You two saved me." They made it back to the cabin before sunset. For the next few days, Eli cared for them both, tending to the fire, cooking, speaking little but meaning everything. The warmth inside grew stronger than the cold outside. Clara began to laugh again, softly at first, then like she used to when life still had color. And Eli, for the first time in years, found himself smiling too. One morning, when the snow started melting, Clara stood at the door ready to leave with her brother. She turned to Eli, tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." Eli took off his hat, eyes meeting hers with quiet honesty. "You already did," he said. "You made this place feel alive again." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Will I ever see you again?" Eli smiled faintly. "Out here, ma'am, the wind carries promises. Maybe one day it'll bring you back." She left, looking back at the cabin until it disappeared into the white horizon. Eli watched until the last echo of the horse's hoofbeats faded. Then he looked at the fire still burning, his lips curving in a soft smile. He knew she'd be safe, and maybe, just maybe, so would he. That night he stepped outside. The stars had returned, bright, endless, free. The same sky that once buried hope now carried it. He tipped his hat to the heavens and whispered, "Thank you." Somewhere far beyond the snowfields, Clara looked up at the same stars and whispered, "Safe with me." And from that night onward, the legend of the cowboy who carried hope through the storm lived on, not in words, but in the wind that still whispered through the plains. So friends, if this story touched your heart, and if it reminded you that kindness still burns, bright even in the coldest storms, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because more stories like this are waiting to warm your soul.